Hi, and welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a registered nutritional therapy practitioner and functional medicine practitioner. Join me as we explore thyroid, brain, and fatigue conditions with positivity. From Hashimoto's to multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue to adrenal dysfunction, I've got you covered. With expert advice and tips to help you take action now and inspiring real patient stories from successful individuals who refuse to let their health hold them back. Start your journey to good health today. And don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health. That's GOODE. Or visit my website at nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Today, we welcome Emily Barker to the Good Health Podcast. Emily is a certified registered nutritionist and a fertility expert. She's completed the Making Babies Naturally year-long fertility training and mentorship and is a Fertility Nutrition Center accredited practitioner. Emily believes in the power of nature, the power of the female body, and that everything you need to heal is already inside you. She likes to take complex science and a heavy subject matter and make it accessible, approachable, playful, and ultimately enriching. And she has helped countless women achieve their dream of becoming a mother. Today, we're going to have a conversation around trimester 0, the preconception, and trimester 4, postnatal stage, the two most forgotten and least talked about times within the fertility journey. Let's join the conversation. So Emily, welcome to the Good Health Podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And, like I said, it is this sort of slightly different area of pregnancy. We always think of like the 3 trimesters. So why don't you just kickstart let's start with trimester 0. Why don't you kickstart and tell us what we're talking about when we're talking about trimester 0, what that actually means?
Yeah, when it comes to, planning for a family, getting pregnant, most people jump right in and they're not really kind of thinking about preconception phase. So when we're talking about trimester 0, we're thinking about the time prior to conception. So generally we're thinking about a 3-month period, and that's the maturation cycle of an egg. So obviously as women, we're born with all the eggs we're ever going to have. And, even further back than that, our mother and our grandmother kind of carried our eggs in them as well. These eggs obviously are with us for all of our lives, but kind of prior to ovulation, the 3 months before that is the kind of maturation phase where the eggs are maturing and kind of most of kind of what we attribute to kind of quality is happening. So that kind of trimester 0, we're talking about that 3 months, but actually, it can be longer, and ideally it's longer than that. So it's really thinking and taking a step back before, we plan to conceive, to look at getting our bodies in the best place possible for conception. So yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking about when we talk about trimester 0.
Let's just look at what you said there, because I love that fact that our grandmothers carried us. I think that's really interesting. Can you just sort of explain that a little bit? Because some people may not know this as a fact. I know it's something we got taught when we were studying, but some people may not know this. But it's this idea that all our eggs are already there. So your grandmother, you as an egg, was actually already in your grandma.
Yeah, exactly. Which is wild, isn't it? It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it, to think about it like that?
Yeah, and I think we're learning more and more about this epigenetic piece, what kind of our grandmother was exposed to, and our grandma actually, in a way is impacting on our health and, our fertility as well. So I think, that's another really important thing to kind of think about in trimester 0, that it's not just about conceiving and obviously hopefully conceiving relatively easily, but it's also about planning for the health of the future generations, because what we are doing, what we're exposed to in that 3 months actually, not only sets us up for healthy conception, pregnancy, but also the health of that baby's baby, and female as well. So it's so important, and it's something I think people don't think about, and it is kind of forgotten. It's all the focus is on pregnancy and not really on kind of preconception.
Maybe the women, that maybe men as well, but the people that think of that preconception stage are maybe the ones who are struggling to get pregnant. So they are forced to think about that stage. But like you said there, it's not just about conception, is it? There's a lot more involved and a lot more reasons to look at this phase.
Yeah. So, even if obviously nobody knows that they're going to have fertility issues before they kind of start trying, but, even if you don't know that you're kind of having those struggles, just because you could get pregnant straight away doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great idea just to jump into that preparation work. And a study or some data that was released, I think it was Tommy's charity did a study, and it said that most couples spend more time planning for a holiday than they do for a pregnancy, which
that's wild. That's amazing, isn't it, really, when you think about that?
Yeah, actually growing a human, it's a big deal. It's not necessarily anyone's fault because it's not something we're taught, educated about. And
yeah,
obviously infertility, there's lots of research around that. But in terms of, I guess, women's health in general and like pregnancy, postpartum, preconception, there's not tons of research. There is more coming to the fore. And I think there was something recent actually that showed that 90% of women don't have adequate nutrients needed for conception and pregnancy.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? That's really unbelievable. That's such a high amount.
Yeah. And going into a pregnancy in a depleted state is just going to have a huge knock-on effect on, your health. Generally baby gets everything it needs because kind of how it works, but it really will be at the kind of detriment to mum. So really putting in that work to get your nutrient stores, get your body and your health in a really good place before you conceive is obviously going to stand you in really good stead, whether you're, struggling to conceive or not.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's really good to have this sort of conversation because, I work with a lot of women who are at that age where they are thinking about getting pregnant or wanting to get pregnant, or it happens maybe without them too much planning. But I work with a lot of women at that sort of stage of life. And I think it is really important to raise this awareness because, like you said, there isn't really much out there unless we're talking about infertility or IVF or, that sort of thing. Then obviously it gets talked about. But outside of that, you really don't hear much around this sort of area of pregnancy, do you? It is. I know we said right at the beginning there, we mentioned sort of the forgotten trimesters, and it is sort of forgotten. It does feel like it gets. I mean, I don't work in the fertility world like you do, but even to me, looking in from the outside, it does feel like it gets neglected and it isn't focused on for everyone. It's focused on as though it's almost like that subset of people who are struggling should look at this, but other people maybe necessarily need to. And that feels really sad. It's a shame for women's health that's the case.
It is, especially, when you look at 9 out of 10 women or 90% of women don't have enough nutrients. And those aren't, women that are struggling with infertility. Those, that's the kind of general population. It's actually really important.
And you do see, because you said there, it's like the mother's health that suffers. And I see a lot of people coming into clinic to me where they've started with something like autoimmune or a thyroid problem or something like this postpartum. It's a time where some of these things can trigger. And if mum is not healthy going into pregnancy, or when we say not healthy, I mean doesn't have all those nutrients that they necessarily need for pregnancy rather than being ill, there's more chance of these things developing as well as postpartum issues, I guess. It is really important that everybody does really work on this stage and focuses on it. So how early on, I know you mentioned the maturation of the egg timeframe there, but how early on would you like to see, as somebody who is a fertility expert and really knows their stuff in this field, how early on would you like to see somebody starting to think about this preconception phase?
Yeah, I think it's, as early as possible, a 6 months to year out. Ideally, just to kind of really start being a bit more mindful about the choices that you're making in terms of really obvious things like alcohol, caffeine, and kind of, obviously reducing those type of things. It does depend on kind of what's going on. So obviously if you're someone that knows you've got lots of issues around your menstrual cycle and, maybe you don't have regular periods or, there's kind of niggling symptoms there, as definitely as early as possible. So maybe don't start trying to kind of look at that when you're trying to conceive. Ideally, if that's the case, looking at, a year before, 6 months before, trying to work with an acupuncturist or, a functional nutritionist or someone that can help get those cycles working properly ahead of trying to conceive. And I think, for the general population, obviously, if you have regular cycles and you don't know, that you have any fertility issues, it really can't hurt to do as much preparation as you can. And I think just getting that basic blood work, looking at your ferritin, your iron stores, things like B12, folate, vitamin D, because it does take time as well to correct those kind of sorts of insufficiencies or deficiencies. Ideally, if you know kind of 6 months ahead of wanting to try and get pregnant, got very low vitamin D, you've got enough time to correct that and work on that before you kind of get pregnant. I think another thing as well, if you do have low levels and you conceive straight away, you're very limited in pregnancy in terms of dosages and things like that to fully be able to correct those. Obviously, you want to be kind of flagging those things up prior to getting pregnant. So if you do need, a high dose of vitamin D, you can do that, and you're going to set yourself and baby up for kind of success if you're kind of correcting that, rather than finding out in pregnancy that it's low and not kind of being able to fully correct that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And is it ever too late? Obviously, once you're pregnant, trimester 0 is gone. So obviously that is too late. But I guess what I mean by that is it still worth somebody trying to do these things, even if it's a few months out, or, a month out even? Or does it really need to be 6-12 months to see the benefits? Is it still in a short, even if it's a very short space of time, is there still things that they can do that would still benefit trimester 0 phase?
Yeah. And I think obviously, I think this is, most people are aware of the folate or folic acid and needing to be taking that well in advance. And, same with vitamin D, I know, general GPs, and they will be recommending that to patients. But yeah, taking a really good quality prenatal, at least 3 months, but, even starting to take it a month before is going to help things. But yeah, I think for everybody, because of that, neural tube and the kind of spina bifida risk of, not having adequate levels of folate early pregnancy. And that's kind of happening, weeks into a pregnancy. So it's not something, it needs to be right kind of prior to pregnancy. But yeah, that is it is very kind of widespread and is the kind of the general NHS information for women. But, folic acid isn't the only nutrient that's important for pregnancy. And I think, there's so many nutrients, again, don't kind of get looked at or forgotten about. Vitamin D, folate, so important. But, there's things like iron. That's one that I see low all of the time in my female clients. I think majority of my clients don't have kind of optimal levels of iron, and lots of them have quite low levels. If you get your levels checked in the NHS, unless they're deficient, they don't kind of recommend supporting that or supplementation. But again, going into pregnancy, your iron needs are hugely raised, especially in the kind of later trimesters, kind of creating a blood supply for another human. Like, I think if you think about it, you're creating organs, you're growing bones, you're growing like a human. And I think it's just really underestimated how much in terms of macronutrients is needed to kind of do that. It is like running a marathon. I think lots of things like pregnancy is incredibly taxing on the body in so many ways. And nobody would go into a marathon without training, without looking at their nutrition. But we do it for pregnancy, and it's the same, it's no less of a feat for the body.
Yeah.
So yeah, things like iron, things like selenium, iodine, the B12, there's loads of, really important vitamin A that are needed. And it's not something that, is necessarily planned for or thought about, especially if we're just kind of obviously advising women just to take folic acid and vitamin D. There's lots more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what things would you, let's say somebody came to work with you in this preconception phase, what sort of things would you want them to be doing? Are we talking, you've talked a little bit there about like supplementation, are there like, is it like sort of a case of a mix of diet things, supplementation things, testing? What sort of things would you be wanting people to do to support themselves during that phase?
Yeah, well, in my clinic, I am generally working with the people that are struggling to get pregnant. I do sometimes have the odd couple that will come to kind of optimize things in advance, but generally, it's couples that are struggling to get pregnant. So, we're looking at getting to the bottom of what getting in the way. Sometimes they will kind of have specific diagnosis, perhaps PCOS or endometriosis. But a lot of the time it's the kind of unexplained infertility diagnosis, which, essentially means they haven't found the reason why that couple aren't falling pregnant. Male factor is a huge the reasons, I see that a lot. It's 50% contributes to 50% of infertility cases. I'm looking at getting to the bottom of, why that couple potentially aren't falling pregnant. Might be, kind of looking at things like progesterone and thyroid, the kind of things that you see very clearly that, that's not in the place it needs to be for healthy conception. But then we're kind of getting a bit into the more nuanced areas. So, looking at microbiome health. So there's lots and lots of research and more kind of coming to the fore about how microbiomes impact fertility, the vaginal or seminal microbiome, the gut microbiome, obviously, which is kind of a more established one, and oral microbiome. So, all of these things we're learning, that they are connected obviously to health, but also to our fertility. So in quite a lot of cases, we're looking at optimizing those, looking at the gut, kind of seeing what's happening there. The vaginal microbiome, I think that's getting quite a lot of airtime now. And I think a lot more people are kind of learning that there is an ecosystem there, and certain microorganisms, certain infections can impact conception and pregnancy, can raise the risk of things like preterm birth, miscarriage. A lot of the time we are kind of looking at those microbiomes, seeing what's there, working on getting rid of what we don't want to be there, and then optimizing the good levels of beneficial bacteria that, we know wants to be there for healthy conception. And then, kind of really, aside from getting to the bottom of things, we're optimizing health and kind of nutrient stores for healthy conception. So I do look at levels of nutrients, and sometimes running a kind of really comprehensive look at the whole spectrum of nutrients. Particularly, I think, I do have some clients that have secondary infertility. So they have potentially gone into a first pregnancy without preparation, gone through a pregnancy, gone through the kind of whole postpartum, and been talking about, I think, how much that kind of does strip the body of micronutrients, kind of, going into another pregnancy. Often I think nutrient levels will be kind of in the toilet, if I don't know a better word.
Yeah, and you don't think about it being sort of the impact on second pregnancy, because we do, generally, people have their children in a relatively small space of time most of the time. Some people do have them further apart, but there's probably a big percentage of people where they do have the pregnancies relatively close together in there. If you look at their whole lifespan, it's usually within a sort of a window. And you don't think about the impact that actually a first pregnancy will have had on the body, and how that would impact that preconception stage for a second pregnancy. Like I hadn't thought of that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot. You think the body has been in service to another human for so long, and it really, really does take its toll on the stores of nutrients. So essentially with my clients in my clinic, mainly we're trying to get to the bottom of things, hopefully correct those things if anything crops up, and then really kind of optimize everything through diet and lifestyle, and kind of really getting a super nutrient dense diet in place to set the body up and prepare them for pregnancy.
I know you said that a lot of what you do is for the people who obviously are struggling, and we've talked about how that's usually when people talk about this preconception phase. Would you like to see more people in clinic who are coming to you because they're thinking they want to get pregnant and they're doing it to optimize, as opposed to because there's a problem?
I would absolutely love that. I think, if we could get to a place where we're thinking along those lines of, okay, want to, plan for a baby, let's take 3 to 6 months of really, looking at what we're putting in our bodies, what we're exposed to, how we're living. I think that would, in terms of a healthy population, it's going to really kind of stand as in really good stead for kind of future generations and health. Because it does have that knock-on effect. And also, kind of learning those, how to really nourish yourself, how to take care of yourself, learning about your nutrition, that can get passed on to the future generations as well. So I think it's such a valuable thing to kind of take time to learn about yourself, learn about your body, learn how to really nourish yourself. Yeah.
You have the Fertile Foods Essentials course, don't you, that you run, which I guess would be perfect for people that are wanting to do this, that are wanting to prepare their body for pregnancy.
Yeah, exactly. So that course is beginners kind of intro into all of the things in terms of food. So kind of learning about your body, how it works, how your hormones work, how we can really get our bodies in the best place possible, prior to kind of conception. And it has, meal plans to support you with that. And it's a kind of like a mini course essentially, and super accessible. So yeah, that would be a great thing, I think, for anybody who's planning to conceive and, in the next year or so.
Great. You've talked a little bit there about the, sort of the improvements in further down the line, sort of for future generations, and that sort of side of things. But if somebody takes these steps in, trimester 0 in this preconception phase, what improvements would you expect to sort of see within pregnancy if people work on these steps? What are the things that people, we can expect to see in terms of, the next 9 months that are coming up?
Yeah, it's have it going in with really good stores. Again, you might not notice that you're feeling the benefit, but if you don't do it, you will notice, having issues with energy levels, low levels of nutrients, anemia, things like that. Also, gestational diabetes, doing that work prior to conception to really balance your blood sugars and learn how to balance your meals. It kind of really sets you up for a really low risk of things like gestational diabetes and, any of the risks that come with pregnancy. Getting the body in a really great place in that trimester 0 just lowers your risk of running into complications in pregnancy. So you might not have been pregnant before, you might not know the difference, but if you don't, you've got low levels of nutrients and you're going into it in not a great place, then I think you're more likely to have a more difficult pregnancy. So it's just about setting yourself up to have the smoothest ride that you can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which I think everybody going into pregnancy wants, but maybe just doesn't realize that there's things that they can do to work on that and help benefit that. So if people are listening to this who are struggling to conceive, I know we've touched on how they tend to be the people that sort of reach out. There's people that are struggling to conceive, or they're listening to this, they have been finding it difficult. What are the things you see are the sort of the primary things that I guess come to the forefront with you working with clients that can cause issues with people getting pregnant?
It's a real mix of things, and often it's a combination of things. I think rarely it's just like one thing that you're like, oh, it's that, and then you correct it. Sometimes it is, but
same in autoimmunity. I always say the same thing. Everybody's like, well, what's my root cause? What's causing it? I'm like, there won't be one. Don't expect one. We're going to find lots of things here. It's always the way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And often people kind of tend to think about fertility as a reproductive system issue. And, they think, okay, well, how does that affect my ovaries or conception? People kind of don't tend to understand that it actually is a whole body event. So, it's your reproductive system and your reproductive hormones are plugged into what's happening in the wider body. So it's complex, and often, particularly if there are things like PCOS or endometriosis, it's a kind of body-wide issue, and it's not necessarily just affecting the reproductive system. And I think the kind of common things that I see, obviously thyroid dysfunction, so, hypothyroid is quite common, and generally that probably won't crop up on its own either. As I say, male factor, so that crops up very regularly.
And again, that's one that sort of gets forgotten quite a bit, isn't it? We generally, when we talk about pregnancy, the focus is around the woman, and people forget that there's two parties to it. The other side needs looking at as well.
Yeah, and sometimes if there is a known issue on the female side, so maybe there is endometriosis or PCOS or something like that, the male isn't thought about, and sometimes it's both, and that's missed. If there's kind of a low AMH diagnosis, all the kind of focus is on that. And sometimes things like, actually thoroughly checking the male side kind of gets missed. I do see a lot of nutrient deficiencies, low levels of nutrients, progesterone. I've got lots of clients at the moment with low progesterone or kind of luteal phase issues. It's really common. And again, there can be lots of reasons. But I think, one of the big drivers for that, I think, is the stress piece. And I think we're going to see that more and more, because I just, I don't know about you, you probably see it in your clinic as well, but I think, since COVID, modern life has been very stressful, but I feel like with everything going on in the world and post-COVID, it's getting worse.
I talk about that stress piece all the time. It's such a big root cause for all the autoimmune stuff, for, optimizing people's health. I work with it a lot. I was actually reading some research this morning. I talk about it a lot in the book that I'm writing at the moment. But I read some research this morning. Actually, I've got it here somewhere. I had it out. And health handouts, so what it's going to cost the economy will this year, currently, what it costs the economy, and this is just stress-related health issues, so nothing else, just stress-related health issues. Currently this year is costing £65.7 billion to the economy. By 2028, they reckon that's going to have risen. The estimate is that will have risen to 90.9 billion. So that, I mean, it's a huge increase. And not only is 65 billion is already a huge amount anyway. I mean, it's already a massive problem to today as we are, but that's going to rise by a ridiculous amount in the next few years and hit that sort of 90 billion. I mean, that's crazy. And that is just stress related issues. There's obviously a lot of other issues as well that will be costing things, a lot of other health conditions, but anything that is stress related, that's a huge amount of money that it's costing. And stress has such an impact on so many different things. I talk about this a lot because I'm seeing it as, in my clinic, I'm seeing it as a massive trigger for, all the sort of suboptimal health or autoimmune conditions, low immune function, all of these sorts of things. So it's interesting that it's a pregnancy thing as well. It impacts everything, doesn't it? Stress just impacts our whole body.
It is a tricky one in the kind of fertility context because obviously with anything, it's very difficult to, attribute A equals B, stress equals infertility. It's so much more complex than that. But
yeah,
it definitely plays a part. And trying for a baby is really stressful. And then, trying for a baby and not succeeding is incredibly stressful in itself. And then obviously add to that, everything else that's going on in the world and just modern, it's a lot. And I see it a lot. And that's something I, work with all of my clients. But yeah, I'd say progesterone, I see that a lot, low progesterone. Obviously things like endometriosis and PCOS. I think endometriosis is getting more and more, well, I don't know, it's getting more and more common. I think it's just being diagnosed better and we know more about it. And I also do have an inkling that kind of, again, post-COVID, we're still discovering kind of how that has impacted the body. And I think, in terms of triggering inflammatory conditions and...
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot more, we're definitely seeing a lot more in terms of autoimmune being triggered, those inflammatory immune conditions and things like that. So it doesn't surprise me that it's the same for, things like endometriosis.
Yeah. And that's just an inkling. Obviously, I'm not basing that on any data. I don't think we have it yet, but I just, I think we're still learning, aren't we, about the impact it's had. And I think in terms of gynecological issues and fertility, the initial research isn't kind of showing anything, major in terms of it affecting fertility directly. But yeah, I wonder in terms of things like endometriosis, if we are going to see an increase in those kind of inflammatory conditions.
So let's talk about, at the beginning we said we're going to talk about these 2 forgotten trimesters. So let's talk about the other one. Let's talk about the 4th trimester. First of all, explain to us what we're talking about when we say the 4th trimester. What time period are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're talking about postpartum. So we're talking about after giving birth. And again, I think, trimester 0, obviously, isn't thought about. But I think, we know postpartum is a transition, is a period that, women go through after giving birth. And it's really not given the attention and the research that it needs, really. And the kind of pregnancy is the focus and, eating well in pregnancy, making sure the baby gets everything and then focusing on birth. And then kind of once the baby is here, people don't necessarily think that, okay, the baby's here, I can kind of just go back to baseline.
I think mum gets forgotten a bit, doesn't she, as well? Because, baby's here, baby's taking up, quite rightly, taking up a lot of time and is, maybe not sleeping and, and all of this sort of stuff and needs feeding. And so baby comes first, especially for mum. Mum's got to put baby first and does kind of, mum almost gets forgotten about a little bit, I think, at this time. But actually, she's still been through a huge change and is still going through huge changes and is also now not getting much sleep and then having to feed a baby, and all of these things that are still putting pressures on the body.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the biggest, well, it is the biggest transition that a kind of woman will go for physically, emotionally, mentally. And your body in pregnancy has gone through enormous changes in terms of, hormonally, all your kind of tissues and, have literally changed to kind of accommodate growing baby. Your thyroid has supported a baby. It will need to completely remodel kind of postpartum. Obviously birth is, and it's another marathon. Essentially you've just run 2 marathons, you've given birth, maybe you've lost a lot of blood during birth, you'll definitely will have lost, a lot of energy and kind of nutrients in that process. And yeah, there's just continual pull from the mother's nutritional resources in pregnancy. Yeah, you've got a baby, you are obviously adjusting to that enormous adjustment and transition, and obviously learning how to, take care of a tiny human. And then your body is trying to recover. You're obviously akin to running 2 marathons, and now you're not getting much sleep. Your tissues need to heal. There's a lot of kind of energy and nutrients needed, for healing in the body alone. And then obviously breastfeeding. Not only have we grown this little human, now I need to kind of feed the human. And actually, I think people don't realize, they think, obviously pregnancy takes an enormous amount, but postpartum, the requirements of macronutrients and energy is actually 4 times more than pregnancy.
Wow, really?
And I think I read something that the protein requirements of a postpartum woman higher than the average female athlete.
Gosh, it's amazing. You don't realize the pressure it puts a pressure on the body, but you don't realize how big that pressure is, do you? It's incredible. What things can people do during this postpartum phase? What can they do in this trimester to look after themselves?
So I think the key with this is planning ahead before the birth. Obviously when your baby's here, like if there's not any time to kind of factor that in, especially in terms of cooking. So, I definitely recommend way in advance of the baby coming, just start batching things, or, if you're making dinner, make more, and just freezing. So you've got a real freezer full of nutrient dense foods, and, things that you're looking at, and things that are really going to help. So our collagenous, collagen rich food, so kind of slow cooked meat is really good. So iron stores are going to be low, B12 is going to be low. I mean, all your nutrients are going to be low, but kind of what the kind of body can take, those kind of slow cooked meats are the most kind of bioavailable and most easily, digested, so the body can kind of take, as more nutrients as it can out of those. So yeah, looking at making warming stews and lots of slow cooked meat. Things like bone broth can be really good. So, it's all those foods that are going to really help with the kind of tissue repair, topping up those nutrients. So yeah, just really kind of filling your freezer with things. Obviously oily fish, seafood. Again, it's all the kind of animal products. And I think that's another thing to kind of mention. We haven't touched on is vegetarian, vegan diets and pregnant and trimester 0, preconception, pregnancy and postpartum. So even if you are kind of eating all those foods, you are going to really need to top those up. But if you're kind of a vegetarian or vegan, it is going to be very difficult to maintain decent levels of nutrients throughout pregnancy. As we say, the baby kind of gets all it needs, but anything that's kind of not coming in from the diet or is already in stores, it draws from bones, teeth. We don't want to be coming out with lower density bones in our teeth unless, so, I generally don't recommend a vegan or vegetarian diet in pregnancy, postpartum. Obviously, I always support my clients, whatever they want to do, but I just don't feel you can get what you need for yourself and your baby without eating animal products. If it's kind of for ethical reasons, that's very different. But I think, a lot of people, which is kind of shifting, I think, but, there was a huge trend towards vegan diets and for health. But again, that people aren't really realizing or weren't kind of seeing, this kind of side of it, preparing the body and kind of just going into pregnancy on a vegan diet and coming out the other end, with lots of kind of deficiencies, and does take such a long time to recover in that postpartum period. And I think that's another thing. It takes about 2 years.
I was just going to ask you, how long are we talking for the postpartum period? What are we looking at? Because, that sort of, preconception, that sort of trimester zero, we've sort of said 3, ideally 6 months, how long is postpartum?
Yeah. And I don't think there's a definite answer for that. And it can vary obviously from woman to woman, but I think, 2 years to really let nutrient stores come back up and for everything else to settle, your pelvic floor. I mean, your body's just gone through such an enormous change, and then you're undertaking, the most intense time of your life, and looking after a tiny human whilst obviously trying to recover and breastfeed and nourish, a baby in that way as well. And yeah, it takes time, and there's a bit of a narrative about bouncing back and getting your body back in 30 days, or it's just not realistic. And I think that's important for kind of people to kind of expect it to take long and kind of embrace that. Take it easy. And I think doing the freezer, batch cooking and all of that, but when the baby's here, trying to ask friends, family, to bring food, to cook food, to bring food over. And I think that's another thing that just makes that postpartum so difficult now, especially in our Western culture, is that we don't have that village, we don't have that kind of community. And in a lot of cultures, postpartum women, their feet don't touch the ground. There's women around them, cooking for them, supporting them as they're feeding the baby. And there's that recognition that like the mum needs to be nourished.
It takes a village. That's what they always said, right? It takes a village to raise a child. And we've lost that community, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. And a lot of couples don't have family near, they don't have that support, they don't have that. That's another contributor, I think, to women kind of struggling more in postpartum and not really having that time to nourish themselves and to be kind of taken care of as well.
Yeah. So if there's people listening to this, maybe whatever stage that they are at, whether they are wanting to get pregnant now or in that sort of postpartum phase, what would be your sort of top tips to people? What would you want somebody to take away from this conversation? And what would you want them to sort of learn from this?
Yeah, I guess it's just kind of seeing how each trimester has a knock-on effect on the other trimester. So, starting in trimester zero and really taking a step back and doing that preparation before starting, to try for a baby will just stand you in such good stead for pregnancy and for postpartum. And just recognizing how big an undertaking making a human is for the body and for health. And I think also that piece about, it's not just about getting pregnant, but also looking at the health of the child and future generations as well. And just kind of seeing how it all pieces together.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message for people to understand. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It's been really great to have this conversation with you. I think it's hugely beneficial for women listening. And I think it's a great message that you're trying to spread and raise awareness of for women, but also, like you said, for the men as well. We will link the course that you mentioned, the Fertile Foods course. We'll link that below this episode, and we'll put other links as well so that people can find you on, Instagram and things like that, and find your website. If they want to reach out to you, then all of that will be below the episode. But thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Good Health Podcast. Do share the episode with anyone who you think it may benefit or who may enjoy it, and help me spread the word by rating the episode or leaving a review. If you want more, you can find other episodes in the series on your podcast app or sign up to my free newsletter. Not only will you get information on new episodes launching, but we cover lots of health topics with the Ask Nicole section where you can send in your questions, my favorite recipes, my favorite products, tips and tricks to help you on the road to good health, and much more. You can sign up free of charge at nicolegoodhealth.com/newsletter, also linked below. I hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.